On this edition of The Best Times, we examine two approaches to communication with Alzheimer's and dementia patients by using art and music. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plough Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you. Hello, I'm Chris Hardaway. Welcome to this edition of The Best Times, a series that looks at life after 50. Communication is a vital part of who we are as human beings. When diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia strike, the door to communication begins to close, and our loved ones become trapped inside their minds. But scientists and researchers are discovering ways to unlock that door temporarily by using art and music. Art therapy dates back to the 1940s and has a wide range of psychological applications, including people with dementia. Since making art is inherently perceptual and sensory-based, it uses the brain and body in ways that verbal communication doesn't. Let's examine the science behind art therapy. In an art studio at the Brooks Museum, a class has gathered. The instructors are Sarah Hamill and Paige Scheinberg, and the artists are from Alzheimer's and Dementia Services of Memphis. This is art therapy at work.
The American Art Therapy Association defines art therapy as a mental health profession where a licensed, credentialed art therapist facilitates sessions with clients of all ages through the art materials, the creative process, and the resulting artwork to work on a variety of needs. They could be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, educational, or social goals and needs.
In the fall of 2016, two groups from Alzheimer's and Dementia Services were brought to the museum.
They started their visit in the galleries, talking about the artwork that's here at the museum. That was sort of the springboard for the art-making activities. So the artwork that we picked in the galleries was something that we chose so that it might inspire what they were doing in the studio. So we would look at pieces from our permanent collection, we looked at pieces from special exhibitions, and we tried to pick things that might elicit a memory or that might bring up an emotion or help connect to some part of their lives that they could then follow up with in the art-making activity in the studio.
The group was shown artworks such as this famous Carol Clore piece and was encouraged to use Clore's painting as inspiration to create a mandala to express their favorite colors and memories of fall. After viewing The Catman by David Bates, they were asked to create a collage that tells the rest of the group something about themselves. Finally, they were asked to create a group mandala based on this classic Thomas Hart Benton work. The pieces from the Brooks collection opened the door to creative inspiration that produced paintings, sculptures, and collages.
I think the creative process is something that is instinctual in humans. I think between cooking or gardening or making art or making music, those are things that we instinctively want in our lives. And so having an opportunity like this maybe brings something out that they either forgot they had or just hadn't experienced in a long time.
After the sessions ended, the artworks were collected and displayed in a gallery at the Brooks Museum. For the artists, these sessions gave them the opportunity to connect and communicate with paper and paint.
I think it was really a very meaningful experience for all of them.
To find out more about the many applications and benefits of art therapy, I invited two art therapists into our studio, Carrie Curtis and Paige Scheinberg. Now, we've just seen the class at the Brooks and the exhibit that's up at the Brooks, and you were a part of that. Give me a little behind the scenes, a little background on what went on in that class.
So we worked with two different groups from Alzheimer's and Dementia Services, and each group came for 4 sessions once a week. So they would come to the Brooks and we would greet them outside. Then we'd bring them into the rotunda of the Brooks and then take them into one of the galleries with artwork that we had chosen to kind of help support the theme or the goals of the day. For example, one of the pieces we saw was a piece of art by Carol Clore that was clearly an image of a fall scene. After we looked at that piece, we went down to the art studio and introduced the concept of a mandala, which is a circular art form. And one of the groups, we kind of explored doing that kind of pointillism technique that Carol Clore has to help them. And so then for that directive, they were able to kind of begin exploring with a favorite fall color, doing that pointillism technique. And then some of them went on to create like a scene that was a favorite memory from fall, or for other people it was more appropriate to stick with that color or maybe some other fall colors to stay in that kind of in that place of positive emotions and reminiscing and, you know, kind of remembering what fall is like.
It's all about communication, isn't it? And particularly, we're dealing with a population here with Alzheimer's and dementia patients that can have difficulty communicating.
Sure.
Did you feel communication with them?
Absolutely. I mean, I think something that is really unique about art therapy is that we help people find their voice through the art, through the materials, through the creative process. And so it's not necessarily about the words that they say about the art, but how do they engage with the art, both in the galleries and in the artwork. You know, we communicate verbally and non-verbally, and I think that's where art therapy really meets people with dementia where they're at. You know, we don't expect them to be able to talk in a way that requires insight or you know, long phrases. We really want them to communicate through the art and through using the materials.
Well, let's talk about benefits. Carrie, what do you feel are the benefits of art therapy and who benefits from it?
Well, even just like just to jump off what you were just saying, specifically even for those with dementia, the way that that Alzheimer's progresses in the brain has sort of a butterfly characteristic. And so actually, you know, when verbal processing skills go away first, the art and the music and just arts in general are still preserved. And so it can be a valuable tool to communicate with, you know, people going through something like that.
Can it impact people who have certain diseases, say Parkinson's, for example, or someone who suffered from a stroke, arthritis? Can it have an impact with people like that?
Definitely. Sometimes it's hard for people to tell you what hurts or where the pain is, but they can draw it. And so, you know, what's the temperature? What color do you associate with it? Where is it? And then a lot of times, you know, you realize they've been on the wrong medicine or something, and people are, you know, being prescribed something different, all because they're able to communicate it through the art.
Can you treat emotional problems? So often with the older population, loneliness is a problem. Loneliness can lead to depression. That can lead to suicidal thoughts. Can art therapy have an impact in emotional areas?
Absolutely. Well, as a mental health profession, we are trained to work with people with a variety of diagnoses. And I think that working with people with depression or suicidal thoughts, a lot of anxiety, those are the people that a lot of times we start out working with, and then we realize there may be some other underlying issues. So, you know, I think as an art therapist, I hope to help them begin to express those thoughts and those experiences through the art, but also give them a practice that they can take home with of them and then bring back to therapy, or if they're finished with therapy, to continue to use the art to help them express the depression or the anxiety, but also, relieve the anxiety and begin to experience some of those other emotions like peace or calmness or joy or even happiness.
In that context, Carrie, you spoke about the brain, with the Alzheimer's brain, and how this art therapy can reach into a part of the brain where there are memories. But in the broader aspect, what's the science behind art therapy?
The place where emotions are stored on the brain is closer to your right brain, your sensory processing, your, sort of touch, taste, smell, feel, is where your emotions are located in the brain. So it's actually easier for arts to access that emotional part than your traditional verbal, talk therapy.
I'm curious to know what you've experienced in your practices. What have you seen? How have you seen people benefit from art therapy?
People come into treatment because they feel like they're not functioning in their lives. They can't relate to the people in their lives anymore. And the art helps them see, I do have strengths, and maybe the imagery and the artwork helps them relate to a person in their lives in a different way, and they start to feel hope or a sense of accomplishment, which they probably haven't experienced in a long time.
Carrie, do you see similar results?
It just is a place where people can have conversations when there aren't any words, and so people that go through traumas and children that are trying to struggle to understand things, you can see in their art where they're having problems. With the dementia population, there's times where, actually when I was an intern, I was working at a nursing home there in California, and one of our residents just started painting on one piece of the paper, like one side of the paper. And I kept trying to get her, what's over here? And we couldn't figure out what was going on with her. And they brought her in to scan for a stroke, and she'd had a stroke, and nobody had known it. But it was in her art, so they would have missed all that. So there's a lot, just as far as, diagnosing and working with the other mental health and medical professions that, that art therapy can just grow.
Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, isn't it? Paige and Carrie, thank you very much for being on The Best Times.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Making art is one way to unlock the door to the mind of a dementia patient. Music is another. It's been called the soundtrack of our lives because we associate songs with events in our lives. It only takes a few bars of the music to take you back to a time or a place, to remember a friend or a lover. Those memories are etched into our minds, and the music acts as a trigger to bring them out. In recent years, scientists and researchers have discovered that music can trigger memories in patients with Alzheimer's or dementia. A digital music player and a pair of headphones can play the soundtrack of their lives too. And the results can be amazing. Let's examine the link between music and memory. Miss Velma Haynes is being wheeled into the multi-sensory room at Signature Healthcare.
Having a good day?
Velma is 99 years old and suffers from vascular dementia, the result of a fall that caused a hemorrhage in her brain. Like most dementia patients, she seems withdrawn in her own world. But watch as Reverend Tom Davis places the headphones on Velma. The sound of her favorite gospel hymns seems to act like a switch that turns on her brain, and soon Velma is singing quietly to the music, not missing a single verse.
That's the whole point of the Music and Memory program, is trying to identify those songs that have been with her different parts of her life, that somehow gets rooted in those cells of the brain, becomes a part of who she is. What I love about her is her humor. She laughs, and I just think that's wonderful to be 99 will be turning 100. She finds humor in things, and I just think, I see that being able to come out through the music, but I don't think the music has made her that way. I just think it helps release who she is.
Gospel music is the soundtrack of Velma's life. But what is the source of music's magic? It turns out that the parts of the brain that respond to music are very close to the brain's memory and mood centers.
What we have left is the senses. If the brain is not functioning, whether it's sight or taste or smell, hearing, touch, those senses kind of helps a person get connected again.
How old were you when you started going to church?
I started going to church. I started going to church with my grandmother.
With your grandmother? Okay. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Yeah. You remember?
What's their names?
Yeah, my grandmother was Roseanne.
Roseanne? Okay. You want to listen to another song? All right, let's see what we've got. Let me put this.
What really has come through with Miss Velma is that connection to her grandmother. Formed her, helped shaped her, and she loves her. Just that need to connect is a hunger. And I think the music kind of helps a person reconnect, not just opening up to other people, but reconnect to those feelings, those emotions that you experience as a person. And I really go back to that sense of you connect with yourself.
Scientists and researchers are only beginning to understand how and why music can benefit Alzheimer's and dementia patients. To find out more about the link between music and memory, I've invited 3 guests into the studio. Deborah Ferris is Regional Director of Music and Memory, a nonprofit organization that trains professional caregivers in music therapy. Dr. Mark Hammond is a geriatrician and specialist in internal medicine at Inpatient Physicians Mid-South. And you've met Reverend Tom Davis, Director of Spirituality at Signature Healthcare of Memphis. I think what we saw with Velma, to me it was amazing because it was almost like a door was opening. I don't know whether that's a good metaphor or not, you can tell me, but I'm curious to know stories of other patients, other instances that you may have seen. We've seen Velma. How does she compare to other stories?
I guess one that always comes to mind for me is a story about Sylvia. Sylvia suffered from Parkinson's disease, and she was in community-based care for the last 8 years of her life. Her body was really taken over by Parkinson's. Sylvia had been nonverbal for a number of years. She really had, I guess you could say, a blank stare, really no response. So when we began to give her access to her music, the playlist that we had created, the first thing that we noticed was that she began to make eye contact with her sister during Skype sessions that the care staff would arrange each week. And then the second thing that we noticed was that she began to speak and respond to her sister after, as I said, years of silence. She ultimately began to speak with her nurse, which was shocking for her nurse. And the nurse at first said, well, that's just not possible. She's nonverbal. She's been in my care for years. And what happened was that Sylvia would relax after she had listened to her music for a while, and then it was no longer painful for her to receive care. So ultimately, the nurse said that she was able to not only reduce but completely eliminate Sylvia's pain medications.
Reverend Davis, I mean, you've seen Velma over the course of 2 years in this music therapy. What changes have you seen with and without headphones?
When she first came, my awareness of she was very inward, didn't really, notice what was going on around her or, in the facility.
And then over the last 2 years, she just kind of, you use the word open the door. Well, the door has been open. And even though she may not engage others, you know, or initiate a conversation or ask somebody a question, she's looking for it to happen.
Well, I'm curious about the science behind all of this. I mean, it's almost like magic from your description and what we've seen with Velma, what I've seen in other cases. Explain the magic to me. What does music do?
Simply put, the music centers of the brain are closely aligned with the areas of speech and language. And it's one of the last areas of the brain to be harmed by dementias in specific. And so there's a connection there. You were asking earlier about some patients that you remember. My first awareness of music and its potential was seeing patients who had suffered from strokes that impaired their ability to speak. They knew what they wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come out. That's scientifically, we call that an expressive aphasia. When you sing the lyrics, the words come out. And I guess you could say that's magical. I like to think of it as magical because I think the body is much more than what we can actually look at under a microscope or measure. We have so much more there than, and to reduce it completely to a science, I think, is unfair to the brain in a lot of aspects.
Is this communication?
Sure it is.
What kind of communication would you call it?
Well, it's hard to break it down and describe it exactly, but I think, to me, what I've seen in the brief experience I've had with music and memory is I see that there's an emotional communication that, to me, and maybe even a spiritual communication that goes beyond anything you can describe physically. It connects the part of the brain that interprets emotions and interprets these kinds of things that are hard to describe, and connects them in a way with family members, with friends, with people that they may have, that can't find a way in. This is really almost like a magic door into their brain, or really more into their soul.
Does it have to be special music? Does it have to be a person certain? It does?
It does. So what we've always done in care environments, because of the community setting, it's really not possible to provide favorite music for an individual. It's more generic. What Music and Memory is doing is establishing a new best practice in the care industry and a gold standard, and using eras and genres of music as only the initial stepping stones to this ultimate goal of an autobiographical playlist tailored completely to the individual. And what we've discovered is that that's where the greater benefits live. So it's meant to be given to them when they need it, for as long as they need it, as often as they need it, and that's determined for each individual. But it has to be the music that holds personal meaning for them to take them to this higher level of engagement and community, and where the benefits are.
Are there benefits to the patients that go beyond what we've discussed? I mean, you mentioned, for example, the medication.
The problem we've had in long-term care for a long time is we have patients who are agitated. We don't have any medications that are approved by the FDA to treat that. So we're left with bad choices, really. No good choices in that situation. What a great choice this is. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious as to where this is headed in the future. I mean, we've talked about opening lines of communication, opening doors, whatever. How far can we take this? Where is it going to go? I'll let you answer that one.
Boy, I just see an incredible horizon here. I think this is one of the first applications for this. To me, I'm not smart enough to figure all this out, but I know that there is an application here, many applications that spans many levels of care, including hospital care, nursing home care, hospice care, anytime, any medical arena that you can think of, and any disease that you can think of has a potential application for this therapy to enhance their recovery. I'm not saying it's a standalone cure.
It's not a cure,
but it's an adjunct. It's a wonderful adjunct. I mean, when you think about patients undergoing bypass surgery who have a high incidence of depression post-surgery. This would be a great application to look at possibly applying it there. I think at the end of the day, I just see an endless horizon of possibilities for the connection between music and medicine.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being on The Best Times and talking about this fascinating link between music and memory. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
For more information on music therapy, go to the website of Music and Memory. Want more information about life after 50? Go online to watch more shows and find more resources. And send us your feedback and story ideas to besttimes@wkno.org. That's all for this edition of The Best Times. Please join us next week for more stories about life after 50. Until then, I'm Chris Hardaway. Thanks for watching. Good night. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plow Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you.